Stephen King. Easily one of, if not the most prolific author in American history. Yes, I'm including Richard Bachman in that statement. King is the undisputed master of horror literature, whose writing has been adapted time and time again into film and television across his multi-decade career. There's the big ones, of course: The Shawshank Redemption, Salem's Lot, Stand By Me, The Mist, Carrie, The Dead Zone, Misery, Christine, It, The Shining, an untouchable lineup of adapted works. There's also plenty of middle-of-the-road to straight-up terrible Stephen King books and adaptations, but when you've got a library's worth of novels and short stories behind you, there's bound to be a few clunkers rattling around.
What the f***?
I'm not sure sometimes They Come Back needed 2 movie sequels, but he's definitely got a better on-base average than Dean Koontz. I'm sorry for that stray shot, Dean. Phantoms is pretty fun and creepy.
Word, bitch. Phantom's like a motherfucker. What's up now?
This year alone, there are 4 Stephen King movies and 2 television series: The Long Walk, The Monkey, The Life of Chuck, The Running Man, The Institute, and Welcome to Derry. But among Stephen's menagerie of killer dogs, corn children, Tommyknockers, and Michael Jackson,
did you hear what I said? Freaky boy.
There's only one film that was written and directed by Stephen King himself. A movie that was wildly dangerous to film, was fueled by cocaine, and might not actually have been directed by Stephen King at all.
I'm gonna scare the hell out of you.
Welcome to Film Gone Wrong, a show about movies that should have been big, but something went wrong along the way. A little bit of exaggeration in the last paragraph: Stephen King did direct this movie, but how much of it is possibly up for debate? Not really, but we'll get to it. It's Halloween time, unless you're watching this in one of the other 11 months of the year. But with our current technology ruining brains and flooding the internet with hideous slop, I wanted to talk about a movie where the technology is only trying to kill us, thankfully, instead of selling us fake crystal mugs. Anyone who fell for this shouldn't be allowed to drive a car. Speaking of which, Maximum Overdrive, the movie about cars, trucks, and vending machines turning against humanity, is a cult classic now, but it went up in flames when it landed in movie theaters back in 1986, both literally and in regards to the film's budget. But why would Stephen King, at one of his highest points as an author, decide to take a break from the typewriter and get behind a camera? That's actually the least interesting part of this story, but all the stuff that follows is pretty wild. Let's dig in. Our sources for today's video are the film itself, of course, interviews with Stephen King, some of the cast and crew, which can be found on the special features of the Maximum Overdrive Blu-ray from Vestron Video. I'll also be citing the work of the fantastic people over at the King Cast, as well as the oral history of Maximum Overdrive from Blake Harris at Slash Film. And of course, I'll be talking about the plot of this very silly movie. So if you haven't seen it yet and you ended up here by accident, here's your last exit rant before I talk about the raw animalistic energy of Pat Hingle. Hingled. This movie came out at a very interesting time in Stephen King's career. In 1974, after a long career as a short story writer for magazines, King published his first book, Carrie, which became a best-selling novel and changed everything going forward. Brian De Palma's film adaptation came just 2 years after the book's release and kicked off a decade-long streak of King stories being turned into movies and TV shows. The Salem's Lot miniseries aired in 1979 and is still really f***ing effective at scaring the hell out of me. The year after that, we got The Shining, one of those movies where everyone agrees it's a masterpiece, everyone besides Stephen King. King disliked Kubrick's adaptation of his book so much that in 1997 he wrote and executive produced his own miniseries of The Shining so it would be closer to his original story. If you've never seen it, it's weird as
It's dangerous. You want to stay away from them.
Pat Hingle is also in that. After The Shining was the horror anthology Creepshow in 1982, which was followed by the trifecta of Cujo, Christine, and The Dead Zone in 1983.
The ice is gonna break!
Way too relevant of a movie right now. Children of the Corn and Firestarter hit screens in 1984, then Cat's Eye and Silver Bullet in 1985. He also published It, Pet Sematary, The Dark Half, and the second book of the Dark Tower series, all in the 1980s. Basically, Stephen King was everywhere. On store shelves, writing movies, and even acting in a couple of them.
Holy old Jesus!
But it's Firestarter and Cat's Eye that would lead to Stephen King getting in the director's chair. Enter Italian mega producer Dino De Laurentiis. If you don't know that name, DDL was a film producer whose career stretched from the 1940s into the early 2000s. Following the success of Carrie, De Laurentiis bought up the rights to Firestarter and a few short stories that were part of Stephen King's first collection of writings, titled Night Shift, mostly as a gift to his new wife Martha, who was a big Stephen King fan, along with everyone else in the 1980s. 3 of the stories from that collection would eventually be adapted into the film Cat's Eye. A lot of the stories from that collection would actually be adapted into films years later. Some are better than others. The Mangler is a pretty faithful adaptation, while The Lawnmower Man That story is literally about a monster that mows lawns. De Laurentiis also bought the rights to a little story titled Trucks, which also got its own made-for-TV version in 1997. King had written the screenplay for Creepshow the previous year and came on to Cat's Eye to helm the script. That's where King and De Laurentiis would end up meeting, and by all accounts became very close friends. Martha De Laurentiis, Dino's co-producer and wife, recounts the decision to let Stephen King direct an adaptation of Trucks thusly. Stephen later said to Dino, "I want to direct." And Dino said to Stephen, "Why not? You should. I told you it wasn't exciting." One of the things that made De Laurentiis a bit of an outsider in the American film industry was he would shoot movies outside of Hollywood. Something that wasn't done a lot at the time, especially compared to TV and film productions now. While producing Firestarter, De Laurentiis opened up a production studio in Wilmington, North Carolina, which was the real first movie production to ever happen in that state.
There'd been only one small low-budget indie production anyway before Firestarter came here in 1983.
A beautiful part of the country that is also wickedly hot and humid in the summer months, which of course is when they were filming. But the swampy atmosphere was the smallest problem during production. The biggest problem was Stephen King. Maximum Overdrive, a way better title than Trucks, is a movie about a group of people fighting back against appliances and automobiles, which have come to life thanks to a strange comet that's passing by Earth. It's filled with a hefty amount of practical effects, sets, and explosions. That meant a lot of real trucks and cars driving through at dangerous speeds, sometimes while on fire. That's a lot to handle on a movie set. Rehearsing and coordinating again and again and again with the stunt coordinator and their team, to the drivers, art department, pyro, first and second units, all while making sure it all goes off without a hitch. A really tough environment to manage, which is why the directors who are great at it stand out the most. It's definitely not an environment for a first-time director, especially a first-time director who was battling multiple addictions. Stephen King has fortunately been clean and sober for decades now, but during this time of his career, he had a pretty bad drinking problem and was on all of the cocaine in North Carolina while directing this movie. A movie where all of this happens. A lot of King's behavior on set and creative choices for the film make way more sense when you put them through the lens of cocaine, or a tiny mirror of cocaine. For example, Stephen's first choice for the lead role of Billy Robinson was Bruce Springsteen, who had never acted in anything besides music videos. But that idea was quickly shut down. Weirdly, James Cameron also wanted to cast Bruce Springsteen as Kyle Reese in Terminator, but that's not relevant to this at all. They would end up casting Emilio Estevez as the role of Billy, partially due to De Laurentiis working with Martin Sheen on The Dead Zone a couple years earlier. According to production assistant Chip Hackler, quote, "When that moment became official that there was no Bruce Springsteen, Stephen King couldn't give a shit about the movie." End quote. De Laurentiis was smart enough to leave a first-time director in very capable hands. Italian cinematographer Armando Nannuzzi was pulling double duty as director of photography and babysitting Stephen King. Nannuzzi was a veteran cinematographer with a long line of Italian and French films under his belt, including the original film adaptation of The Birdcage. And he also shot the Stephen King film Silver Bullet right before this one. That's the one where Gary Busey fights a werewolf. By all accounts, King was very involved and excited on set, but was a little bit out of his element when it came to getting what was necessary to make a movie, which is why Armando was put on the job. That created its own issue because Armando didn't speak English. So all conversations between the director and cinematographer passed through Armando's translator, Roberto Crossi, who recalls Stephen's form of directing like this. "Do you want to get a cover shot?" Armando Nannuzzi would ask, and Stephen King would say, whatever if you think we need it. There will be no cartoonish Italian accents in this video. Maybe. Film production back in the 1980s, especially outside of Hollywood, was a little bit more on the reckless side.
It was just a tremendous overdone explosion. Very fun for us construction workers to see.
The North Carolina crew definitely had their own ways of going about things, probably because this was the first movie a lot of them had ever worked on.
It was quite a change for everybody. We had people who had never built sets building sets, people who'd never been set dressers being set dressers.
The film is mainly about semi-trucks flattening people, so most of the picture cars were custom fitted with extended driving rigs, which allowed it to look like the trucks were driving on their own.
Every vehicle was driven by somebody, but they were hidden inside the vehicle.
That didn't always work out, like when the rig on a pickup truck broke mid-scene and nearly hit actor John Curtis.
If it had swerved the wrong way, I'd have been toast.
It was also a sketchy situation for the stunt drivers since there's a good chunk of scenes where trucks are getting blasted with pyro but keep driving, which meant having to safely drive a big rig around while it was engulfed in flames. With so many swords dangling overhead, it's amazing that there was only one accident during production. But it was a big one. While filming a scene where a lawnmower turns rabid, a camera was rigged up on a block of wood to achieve this shot, which is very brief in the film. According to Nannuzzi, and quoted in the legal documents surrounding the incident, the remote-controlled lawnmower took off like thunder and chewed up the camera rig, which was possible because even though the lawnmower blades aren't visible in said shot, King said he wanted to see them. What resulted was a splint of wood being launched by the lawnmower into the right eye of Armando Nannuzzi, causing an absolute horror show. Not a great thing to happen to your cinematographer. Nannuzzi was airlifted out and production was shut down for 2 weeks while he got multiple surgeries to try and save his eye. Nannuzzi, who did return to the picture, would later sue De Laurentiis and Stephen King for $18 million in damages, which was settled out of court. According to Nannuzzi's camera assistant Silvia Gialetti, the accident did hamper the rest of Nannuzzi's career because apparently the world of Italian cinematographers was very gossipy and cutthroat, according to him. Also, a movie that was filming at the same time and at the same studio as Maximum Overdrive happened to be David Lynch's Blue Velvet, which led to Stephen King getting directing advice from one of the best filmmakers to ever do it.
You kid.
Lynch apparently expressed the importance of the 180-degree rule to Stephen King, who didn't fully grasp the concept. I can't even imagine what conversations between Stephen King and Dennis Hopper were like at this time, with Hopper just getting sober while King was on a Dennis Hopper level amount of substances.
That Pabst Blue Ribbon!
Despite the oppressive heat, dangerous environment, a coked up director, and the cameraman losing an eye, everyone on set seemed to have a good time making this movie. Stephen King even rented the local theater to play Godzilla and Night of the Living Dead for the cast and crew. And yes, there was an open bar.
I mean, you know, he rented out the theater, had an open bar, and we all went there on I believe it was a Sunday, and just had a good time.
Speaking of zombies, David Lynch wasn't the only famous director who swung by the set. Stephen King showed a first cut of the film to director George Romero, which contained way more gore than the version that was released in theaters, much to the chagrin of special effects artist Dean Gates.
None of that is in the movie.
This little inclusion of George Romero being on set during filming has led to some unsubstantiated internet claims that Romero shadow directed the film. It's kind of like that rumor that Steven Spielberg directed Poltergeist and not Tobe Hooper. The most likely reason why Romero was on set is that him and Stephen King were buddies. King had written and starred in Creepshow, which Romero directed, and he also has a small cameo in Romero's Knight Riders, which is a movie that dares you to stay awake. Maximum Overdrive was set to be released in March of 1986, but the film was pushed to July so Stephen King himself could promote it.
What do you think of the outcome?
You lose all perspective after a certain point.
But it was
I think they're going to come out and say, it was good.
Which made sense since the entire movie was being sold on the fact that King was behind it and he was at the peak of his celebrity status.
The next time you visit your favorite haunt, why not apply for the American Express card?
The original poster of the film even features a gigantic Stephen King just towering over the main characters of the movie. He also did a stint as a VJ on MTV and is all over the trailer for the film as well.
I want to tell you about a movie called Maximum Overdrive.
Even with King's name and face splashed across the marketing material, the movie bombed at the box office, making only $7 million when everything was said and done. Not great when the budget was an estimated $9 million. Film critic Paul Attanasio phrased the experience of the movie as such.
Watching Maximum Overdrive is like sitting alongside a 3-year-old as he skids his Tonka trucks across the living room floor and says, "Wee," except on a somewhat grander scale. It's hard to even imagine a movie so impeccably devoid of everything a movie ought to include. Maximum Overdrive is like Convoy without the good parts. It's also sort of like Convoy without the bad parts.
In the years since its release, Maximum Overdrive has been reclaimed by some fans, mainly due to it being a goofy horror movie that was directed by the greatest horror author ever, but does it live up to the pedestal that it's been put on? I wish it did. The strangest thing, for me at least, is that Maximum Overdrive doesn't feel like it's from the mind of Stephen King, despite it being written and directed by him. In a few ways, Stephen King's work is kind of a lot like the Coen brothers. Stay with me on this. There's such a distinctive feeling you get from both that you immediately click into within a minute of watching. The Coens have their visual tells in their films that are distinctly their own, and while visuals of King movies are all over the map from being adapted by so many different directors, you know it when you see it. Stories about common people presented with an utterly surreal and horrifying situation, like a nightmarish beast to overcome, a harrowing journey that touches the veil of the supernatural, or a world-altering event that is invading an otherwise mundane life, which also always feels distinctly American.
For your information, the Supreme Court has roundly rejected prior restraint.
This is not a First Amendment thing, man.
In a literary way, not like monster trucks. Speaking of which, Maximum Overdrive does have a few enjoyable things going for it, like the practical effects, the Green Goblin truck, a decent crop of entertaining actors, and the fact that nobody on set knew how to fire a rocket launcher properly. There's plenty to love, especially the opening of the movie where machines are steamrolling kids, pelting people with soda cans, and calling Stephen King an ass.
This machine just called me an ass.
Unfortunately, that's where the movie hits its peak. At least for me. After the opening onslaught of kills, the movie begins to slow down almost immediately. After Giancarlo Esposito gets electrocuted by an arcade cabinet, the film gets caught up in the drama of the characters of the Dixie Boy rest stop, which has varying levels of enjoyment. Frankie Faison is always a great time, but Yeardley Smith is unfortunately playing the shrillest human on Earth, and she never runs out of gas. Maximum Overdrive is a film that puts all the pieces in the wrong place when you're trying to construct a horror movie. The majority of it takes place during the day, which never helps when you're trying to build tension into a scene. The number of kills drops significantly after the first 10 minutes. There's a scene where the character of Deke Miller rides his bike through town and sees all the devastation that the machines have caused, which is not nearly as entertaining as watching the actual devastation happen. Like, how did this lady get strangled by her blow dryer? I want to see that dumb Show me that. The lack of on-screen kills and barely any horror isn't helped by the film's score, which undercuts pretty much every scene. There's a part in the second act of the movie where the trucks demand gasoline from the humans, and we're shown a montage of survivors fueling up truck after truck, hours on end, in the blazing heat, the sun battering them as they're held hostage by a posse of killer big rigs. The kind of scene that would be bolstered by a score that reflects the exhaustion and paranoia that the characters are going through. Something like this, maybe. Not spectacular, but you get the idea. Unfortunately, the entire score for the film was done by AC/DC, and Hell's Bells plays throughout that entire scene. It's a very cocaine move to have AC/DC do the score of your horror movie. Every moment of fear or tension or surprise is drowned out by the soundtrack constantly going, yeah! Ooh! Ah! We can't play AC/DC music because of copyright reasons, but I think that was a pretty perfect Brian Johnson impression. The movie does put a cherry on top of everything by blowing the ever-living out of the rest stop, but then it just comes to a very boring end after that. The last few of the survivors get on a boat and outlast the machine apocalypse for a couple of days, and it ends thanks to the Russians shooting a UFO with a laser that was trailing behind that comet. That's all told with the text card in the final minute of the film. It's kind of the same ending of Das Bus from The Simpsons.
They were rescued by, let's say, Mo.
Its pacing is rough, the soundtrack is distracting, and the number of truck murders is measly. But if you're planning a Stephen King marathon anytime soon, why not throw this into the rotation? It's definitely not the strongest of his catalog, but it is the only one directed by the madman from Maine, and for that, it deserves a special spot in horror history. Or you can get weird with it, crack open a bottle of something clear and order a pizza and watch all 4 hours of Rose Red.
Got 3 unloaded for Reardon, large, with 2 6-packs of soda.
Yep, thank you.
But tell me, what do you think? What's your favorite Stephen King adaptation? How much of the King filmography have you seen? And is there a famous movie flop you want a deeper dive into? Let us know in the comments below. Thank you so much for watching. Give that like button a click if you'd be so kind, and keep it glued to Nerdist.com. Prego. Mwah. Damn it.